Okay, now before we start congratulating ourselves too much, we might realize there are other self-referential species on the planet. Several of my friends own dogs, and this reminds me, and dogs, they know what food is, and they know they want to go out and play, and sometimes you have to say, do we want to take the dog for a W-A-L-K? Of course, pretty soon the dog figures what that is, right? And the dog gets out there, and it sees a smaller dog, and it sees a bigger dog, and so the dogs know who they are and what's not them, and they know about several activities, and they can pay attention to several categories, like going someplace nice, and the activity of running or eating, and they recognize other dogs, not dogs, and they always seem to find the best place to pee. So they have some of these categories already. So it's another way of suggesting that they're hardwired. I don't really like the term, but the point is that the way our neurology is organized is that to be a living thing on this planet is to make a certain distinction between yourself and not yourself. And in fact, did you know that every creature with a backbone participates in a pecking order? A pecking order. This was discovered in the 1890s, I believe, and with chickens, which is called pecking order, and they realized that the top hen, would get as much food as she wanted first, and then the second hen, and then the third hen, and so forth. And this also is among the roosters. The top rooster, and then sometimes the older rooster is out to pasture, he has to wait his turn then. And the young rooster gets kicked back, rather forcefully sometimes, because he's not in the pecking order. Again, I'm saying that there's distinctions made, and that they happen in the animal kingdom, they happen in us. Right now, there's a big contest going on about who gets to be the big dog, whose pack gets to run things. So we share the same neurology, regardless of ideology. That from the famous philosopher Sting. And, well, have you seen the commercial where the dog is running along and he goes, "Bacon!" And he's like, dogs have good sense of smell. "Bacon!" And he runs up and the package is in front of him there, and it's bacon, it's B-E-G-G, like to beg. And the dog's looking at you, "I can't read!" And this goes back to that feral child, those people that grew up on the outside of a social communication and have to be much more in the present. They're negotiating the present, and yet they can't really, well, they project a little in the future. If you don't think they're projecting in the future, then what are dogs doing? They're sitting there going, "I'm going to eat soon." Yeah. Dog food, again. And we think if you believe it, and if you have a dog, you do, the dogs dream. They're laying there going, Here's the deal. I turned to my dog, or my friend's dog in this case. I said, last week when we went out for that run? And the dog goes, "I'd like to go for a run." But when I turn to you and I say, last week when you were studying other topics and we're having other understandings, something on the order of a miracle happens. You can go there. Just like the words the person was using mark their experience about where they like to hang out, about what they pay attention to, so by a simple verb shift, last week, and you go, the past. And you can, with those words, that linguistics, vivify that neurology of yours and have a little of that experience, maybe a lot. And if I ask you, how do you think this might apply to what you'll be doing next week? And you go out there and you go, "I don't know." But there will be a next week. Korzybski, Count Alfred Korzybski, a Polish engineer who, boy, he was so California, even before there was California. He would wear the open collar shirts, khaki shirts. We're talking about the 30s when he was teaching. Bald head like Ken Wilber. I tell you, he was so just ahead of the trend. And he would tell people we are time-binding creatures. He said, you can start out that plants can't move. Well, a few of them can, tumbleweed, but they're not planning where they go. So plants can't move. They're like, here I am. All right? Anthropomorphism. I'm turning the plant into a person. Right? Metaprogram. So then you get animals. And animals can go places. And animals, except squirrels, can build maps. See, the thing about squirrels, you know how they're hiding the nuts for later? They don't remember. They just have a lot of squirrels hiding nuts. And then they got to be in there around summer. But you know that dogs will remember a trail. And a few years back up here in the mountains, friends and I rented horses. And we wanted to go where someplace the horse hadn't been. You can imagine what happened. Horse goes, I ain't going there. So they, in a sense, they have an internal map. They know what they know. I know this way is easy. Yeah? And Korzybski said of those creatures, they're space-binding creatures because they begin to construct a map of the space they move in. We do them one better, don't we? We take that mental map and we turn it into an interstate highway map or a local area neighborhood map or a map on how to get out of a mall because they're designed to confuse you about how to get out. Well, we start, though, with the mental map, yeah? The same way when I said, how do you know that that person will do that? That's an intuition. I had some ideas about it. I've seen them do it before. That was a model, a map you had for it. So not only do we bind space, we bind time. We can move not only with time in the present, like our canine companions, we can also move at will through different time. And if we were to say the truth, we often move through time not so at will. You know, you're walking down the road and a certain smell, a good smell, a certain smell, and you're transported back to that date in high school or college. Maybe you wore that fragrance. Or it's a different smell and you remember that hamburger joint. Or that place you went and it had the sounds. That's another thing. You'll hear an old song. Well, it's old now, but you hear it on the radio or somewhere, and you're transported back to that earlier time. And we know about it. It's called anchoring, well-documented phenomena. And what we're pointing out now is that just in the same way that everyone has a verb, we can now build another vector on that verb, And that vector is that the person isn't merely awakening. They will awake. They awakened a while ago. Flip the word. They're asleep. They were asleep. But now, you awaken on a train. And in the same way that people have a tendency to hang out in themselves or in other or to observe things, people have tendencies to enjoy certain times more than others, or to be tortured by them, frankly. It's not good enough that the bad thing happened once. I'm going to go relive it, and again, and then I'm going to think about who can I repeat that mistake with in the future. No, wait, that's a different seminar. So, but the past for many people is prologue. Why? This is the only why, because they did it before. You hope you understand this is not a serious theory. It's merely a way of suggesting relationships. If somebody likes the past, enjoys the past, we have a word for those people. What do you call those people these days? It's non-pejorative. A historian would be professional in it, but and that's right, that's good. Historians are professional, go into the past people. Further back, the better for some of them, right? That's way back there. What's that? Well, non-pejorative, conservative perhaps. I would suggest traditionalist. Traditionalist. I want you to think about this a moment, that you're here today. You have survived because thousands, if not millions of people had sex before you. No, that isn't what I wanted to tell you. That too. You're here today because what these people in the past paid attention to resulted in their surviving and reproducing. And therefore, it worked. It's got a long history. Why mess with it? You're going to try something new? This experiment's been going on. If you take creationism, a little under 5,000 years. If you take the kind of work they're doing in historical anthropology, maybe 10,000 years since people went, oh, hey, oog, how you doing today? Or, more like, ooh. But 10,000 years, maybe 100,000 years. And you're here today because it worked. Hey, I say throw it out and start over, right? My point is that the conservatives have a point. That we're looking at a set of patterns that worked. And if you look at traditional societies, as they're termed in anthropology, sociology, you find ancestor worship. You find rigorous adherence to rules that are sometimes thousands of years old about what to eat, when to sleep, who to marry, what to do in life, what is good work. And they worked. Yeah. Now the thing is, past isn't here. I want you to look behind you. Because they say, put it in the past is behind you, looking forward to the future. So I want you to check, is the past behind you there? No. So it's a model. It's something that we bring to the only moment we actually have, this one. Yeah? The present. The present is a gift, the gift of the present. And since this is the only place, and Woody Allen, it's the idea, he says, this world might not be all it's cracked up to be. It's the only place you can get a good steak. Call it reality, call it the present, call it a Woody Allen joke. This moment right now is the only one we have. Whoop! And some people realize that. Who knows why? Maybe they got chocolate ice cream when they were young. And they went, I like reality. I'm going to stay right here glued to the here and now. Maybe they got some encouragement. Maybe they found that tradition a bit confining. So, old rules. But whatever it was, they decided the place to be is here. And yet, of course, they go back to the past, because you couldn't understand what I've just said without past experience with the language to make the mental computations, to make sense of my words. Wakarimasu ka? Hey, wakarimasu. Osh. Now, I just used the Japanese little phrase, did you understand? Now, a number of you didn't understand the words, but you heard the tonality, yes? So we're always, with our particular biases, with our ways of understanding the world, trying to grab hold of the meaning. What is the meaning of what we just heard, what we just saw? And of course, we use what? We use the categories we have. And you heard that go up, and you go, I think that was a question. And so, I think this is important. And Ron would say, I do too. And I go, Ron, you don't get it. I think this is important. A little bit of emphasis there, making that difference. Did you know that the future is only about 160 years old? I like to tell people this because it just wigs them out. All right, if you were part of the less than 1% during the Enlightenment, you might have thought about the future, but you thought about the future in an ideal sense, in that Greek sense of utopia. Something to be that you strive for, but not achieve. You never achieve it. And then the Industrial Revolution happened. If you think about pre-Industrial Revolution, people had farming, and farming developed, but once they had a good way to do it, they did it over and over and over again, very successfully. Egyptian civilization, how long do we think that was now? Maybe 3,000 years. The Nile flooding each year and bringing all the nutrients to the soil, and then tilling that soil, and then building those big-ass pyramids, you know? It was a rhythm. It happened over and over again. Even their buildings are actually built specifically to give you the sense of eternity. That's how we're affected by shapes. I'm hoping we're going to get there, because that's way out there as far as stuff people don't know about. And yet we can't not respond to it. Anyone who's seen the pyramids, you go, oh, wow. It's like eternity. And then the Industrial Revolution happened. Can you imagine the first steam engine? The first time that you're at the river, you're down by the river and you're washing your clothes or cooling your feet, and this boat goes by, goes, and the world changed. And you knew the world could be different. And different again, and it could improve. And this idea of progress got into people's brains. And yet the very first science fiction novel, the very first one, written in the 1890s by Bellamy, the only way he could imagine the future was, it's in the title of the book, by going out to, can you imagine this, the year 2000. And the title of the book, Looking Backward. Because you think of our traditionalists did what? They looked back, ancestor worship. They looked back to their religious leaders, the prophets, the gurus, whichever it is. Even in something like philosophy and history, they look back to those previous leaders. Even in politics, they look back, whether it's Caesar or somebody else that they think they might want to model themselves on, the tradition. And so when the person tried to think about the future for the first time and write about it, he looked back. Kind of works though, you know, because if you look back, you go, well, they'll have flying machines, and which, by the way, had balloons on them and looked like boats underneath. And they'd have communication devices, which looked remarkably like a tin can with a string. But they were looking back, Buck Rogers kind of stuff. Isn't the future marvelous? And he wrote this book telling about it. There's a huge movement in the 1890s. There were clubs this guy had. Tens of thousands of people began to dedicate themselves to creating that future. And you know what happened? Instead of looking back, they started to go, how could I change it tomorrow? And a whole new perspective emerged. Instead of looking back on something, people began to look forward. Now, they'd been doing this before. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Looking forward to dinner tonight. But if any of you have read Napoleon Hill, his Think and Grow Rich, he talks about successful people, which, by the way, were Robin Hood. No. Robber barons. These people were robber barons, the railroad magnates, the steel magnates, the guys who they call them monopolies nowadays. I own it all. And listen to their language as he talked to them. They said, well, how did you decide that you were going, how could you stay focused on creating this great wealth? And he said, I had a goal above and beyond my everyday concerns. Neuro-linguistic. The linguistic telling you exactly what to do with your neurology. Yes, look forward to dinner. Yes, look forward to seeing your friends next week. But those could have happened in Egypt. The goal setting began to involve above and beyond your everyday concerns. And by the way, that's also when the literature of success and goal setting changed. The original self-help book was probably Ben Franklin's autobiography. And he listed in there a number of character traits, which he actually had written down and kept inside the inside of his pocket watch to remind himself to be frugal. You know, a stitch in time saves 9. That reminded him to be a good person. That reminded him of what Christian morality was like. Well, he needed reminding if you know anything about his adventures in Paris. So he had this with him, and it was about building character. And from Franklin's autobiography to the success literature, which was often written by ministers and priests and so forth, this success literature all the way up was about how to build character. And then as you got into this century, and if you look at any chart, whether it's the way in which the electronics has gone, the discovery of the electron was in the 1890s. And now we've got DVDs. So if you look at whoosh, I mean, you want to own that stock. Or if you look at from the idea of some of you still using fire to heat your homes, wood, fire, heat, warm house, to the idea of having portable air conditioners you can wear, technology, whoosh, going up. If you look at the idea that it was only a little over a century ago that radio was considered a mystical phenomena, and now we have satellite, immediate broadcast of television events from around the world, it just kept accelerating. That what happened is that people began to get futures above and beyond their everyday concerns. And they began, instead of measuring themselves against who they were, began to think, what about what I'm not yet? And I'm taking a lot of time with this because you can think of some of the meta-programs, as we call them in NLP, as grammatical. That is, that we have a subject, a verb, and an object. And then we have this place where we begin to use language to make a difference in our experience, which isn't in the world. There's only right now. Do I need to remind you of that? And yet, what did I do? I told you about Egypt, and you thought about Egypt. I talked about being present in the now and having ice cream. And then I went about the future and about how Benjamin Franklin, and we're jumping all over time. As Korzybski said, we're time-binding creatures. And once again, neurolinguistic, our field, you can mark that with the verb tense. Now, we know kids don't start out wanting the future. They want the right now, bring it on, right? And then they get older, and then they get like, I want raisins. Have any of you had kids? Any of you been kids? Is that everybody? You probably won't remember this, but Steve Andreas, very observant guy, marvelous person. He has kids by several marriages. So he's watched them go through the terrible twos, as they're called. And he said, I got an idea. What makes them terrible is that it's the first time that they can imagine something and it sticks. In other words, the picture in their mind stays. So they may be having a beautiful day, they got a nice sandbox, but they want raisins. Raisins aren't there. Future, not very far, but raisins, and then the picture unsticks finally. And the parents go, whew. Of course, our adult version of that is some dumb song would get into our head, right? And this sticking and unsticking is the beginning of building a neurological skill that we later mark as what we want. What's not here now that we want to be in the not here, that we want to be in the next here now. I'll do that again. What's not here now that we want to be in the next here now. And we're making distinctions. And these distinctions enrich our maps. Before you ever went over and practiced being in other, you might not have known all the information you could get. You were making more distinctions. NLP is often presented as a model without a theory. Bullshit! there are theories that underlie any model. And the theory that is the basis in NLP is that of representational theory. Representational theory is at the basis of what we do. Fundamental. That we take it as an article of faith, and lots of demonstrations in our experience, but no science. That we respond to our internal, if you will, representations of the world more than we respond to the world itself. By the way, there is a little science in this direction. It's called What the Frog's Eye Teaches the Frog's Brain, one of the authors of which is Francisco Varela. And in this study, they found that the frog was organized to catch moving things. If you took a bunch of flies that had been dead 2 seconds, you don't have to handle them, it's just an image. You got a bunch of flies that had been dead 1 second, 2 seconds in a container, and you drop a frog in, and it's filled with flies, and they're just 1 or 2 seconds dead. It's the 5-second rule with guys. If it falls on the floor, it's still good for 5 seconds. Right, so it's inside the 5-second rule. And you put the frog in there, the frog will starve to death. Because the frog doesn't see flies, the frog's neurology is organized to notice movement. So if you take a pencil, a little dark spot on the eraser, that frog will go after that pencil again and again, that eraser, even though there's no food there. That is a few signals activate the neurology in the brain to do what the frog knows how to do. Now, how does that bear on what we're about here? The fact that we'll get a few signals from the world and we'll go into our previously constructed internal representation and react. So someone who has a phobia, say, of snakes, and I just kind of do something like this, and I got this, and I go, look what I found. Right, and whoa, yeah. And if I can, and they'll take those few bits of information and whoosh, go back to that internal representation and respond to that, even though it's just a few markers stuck together or a rubber snake. That's what we claim, and it sure seems like that, doesn't it? So to take this a little further, wonderful tape with Leslie Cameron Bandler, one of the original and profound contributors to NLP. And it was called the tape is called Lasting Feelings. And in this session, there's a woman, quite attractive, quite smart, and she was very insecure about her husband around other women. And so if a woman walked up to her husband at a party, at a social gathering, she would begin to feel like, well, I'm interchangeable. He could just drop me and go somebody else. And as Leslie talks to this woman, she finds the woman has pretty fuzzy pictures in there. Doesn't really see what the husband is doing, isn't really looking at how attractive the woman is, but rather sees the two close and then goes, I'm out of the picture. And over a session of less than an hour, Leslie talks with the woman to the point that the pictures get rich enough, that is detailed enough, that she now begins to see that her husband isn't interested. And the first distinction was funny. The first thing, well, what if the woman was 95 years old? No, what if the woman what if the woman is like 60, 70 years old? And this woman in her 30s goes, well, I don't know. So Leslie goes, what if she was 90? Because she wasn't making differences. By the end, she said, well, my husband's kind of bored. I think, he's looking over at me, which she hadn't realized before. So this idea of representational theory is that we respond to the representations. When we revise the representations, when we transform the representations, we get change. Now, there's two things inside that. One of them, pretty critical, is correspondence theory. Correspondence theory is the idea that what's in your mind has some relationship to what's outside it. Otherwise, it's for naught. So you can go, oh yeah, I can see my husband's not interested. Meanwhile, they're running off to Bermuda together. So there's a degree of correspondence between what we would call the territory, the world, and the map we have of it. Some degree. Science is a rigorous testing of correspondence. Saying, oh, I'll know what they'll do is called folk psychology. It's like, I know what they'll do. Hey, they always do that. Kind of make it up on the fly. Don't examine your theory. Don't examine your correspondences. Now, there's one more in here. And this is where we get down to the get-go about meta programs. Because this next one is distinction theory. Distinction theory has to do with the number and kind of differentiations we make in order to make our representation. For example, if you didn't see different colors, you wouldn't have as many distinctions. If you only saw in black and white, you'd see black and white and shades of gray. If you see black and white and blue and yellow and green and purple and so forth, you're making more distinctions, are you not? All right, that's distinction theory. In the example I gave you, where Leslie's working with a woman who had kind of fuzzy pictures, about what her husband was like interacting with other women, in that situation, she wasn't making a sufficient number of distinctions in order to be resourceful. What the frog's eye teaches the frog's brain. She took very few distinctions and boom, mapped them into, oh, I'm interchangeable. And so Leslie helped her to develop more distinctions. Is the woman young or old? Is your husband leaning in or leaning out? What is the expression on their faces? And more detail. Now, if you think about this, you already have an area where you're familiar. The representational systems. Visual, auditory, sensation, kinesthetic. We know that athletes, Lance Armstrong does come to mind. Are they going to do that? They're going to rename it the Tour de Lance. We know that Lance Armstrong, did you see the show about him? Yeah. It was incredible that he realized, they did videos of him in Airstreaming and realized that if he changed how he was on the bike this much, it would give him a certain percentage more speed. And of course, crossing the entire country of France, that would make a difference after a while. That's a very small distinction that other cyclists weren't making. I come from the hometown of Michael Jordan. He's a little older now, but we still worship him. And Michael Jordan knows how to do things with his body that I have difficulty imagining. He's like, and with the tongue out at the same time, and there it goes. He makes a lot of kinesthetic distinctions. What's curious is when the sports announcers want to talk to these guys, and they're gals as well in their sports, right when they've just finished. And they go, so how do you feel? And they say something like, good, did good. We don't articulate our kinesthetics, we do them. Yeah? So later on, when Michael showered and he settled back, then he can get more into the auditory, and when he's in that different state, he comes, well, yes, I thought we did very well in that, and Scottie Pippen, and we couldn't have done it without, and his other team played really well, and he's very articulate. Makes a lot of distinctions. If you think about an artist, what is an artist? They're going to make a lot of distinctions in the visual. Now, in representational theory, the more distinctions you make, the more intelligence you have in that category of experience. So, of course, Steve Andreas, again, what they did with their kids is they thought, we'd like them to take up music because music activates neurology really great. If you do it, not if you just listen to it. Doesn't work if you just listen to it. So their kids learn to play the violin at the Waldorf school. So making lots of kinesthetic distinctions, making lots of auditory distinctions, therefore increasing their ability to represent things. When I lived in Japan, I worked with a gentleman, he ran the company, and his Japanese, by the way, he's a big American. You would never mistake him, he's like a truck driver. But on the phone, they thought he was Japanese. His father was a conductor, an orchestra conductor. You think about that, he grew up in an environment where they made lots and lots of auditory distinctions. And then he was able to utilize that in learning languages. They did, they couldn't tell. It was wonderful to go with him when he met people for the first time. Because we'd walk in, I'm a gaijin too, I don't look Japanese. We'd walk in and he'd be there, bigger than you, Ron. And our Japanese counterpart would be looking around for the Japanese person. And he would start to talk and they would be like, well, again, the frog's eye teaches the frog's brain. His representation of somebody who could speak accentless Japanese was based on past experience, past representations. All right, let's make this useful here. When the future was discovered, people started to make more distinctions about the future, more differences about the future. And that made the future more of a place that people could go to. And pretty soon it became such a resource that we now tell people, step into your future and look back on that. And let those other pictures fill in more distinctions so you'll know how you'll get there. So what we're doing here is we're identifying the maps that people already have, and we've discovered a means of expanding them. Now this goes directly to the NLP presupposition that people have all the resources they need. But when you thought about that before, those resources were probably like a positive state, a sense of tenacity, a good decision strategy, a belief that supports those. And those are resources. And I want to get down to the get-go here and suggest that you couldn't have those resources unless you had a past to put them in. And you couldn't apply those resources to a future unless you'd made enough distinctions in that future to apply those past resources. And that's why we teach goal setting. Because otherwise, it's the dumbest thing in the world. You know why? Because people had to find out about your seminar, get in a car and drive there, make the money to learn how to set goals. They set goals. They got to your seminar. With this difference. They made a near-term goal, not really knowing how to make a well-formed long-term goal above and beyond their everyday concerns. And they thought, maybe I could learn to do that here. And now we begin to understand, in terms of meta programs, they're thinking, maybe I can make more distinctions so that can make my future real. So what we're doing with meta programs on a very basic level is we're identifying which ones they're using and then utilizing the category and going, well, if they did more of this, that would be a resource too. Just like being able to see more and hear more and feel more, having access to your past, your present, your future, to yourself, to other, to have observer more often, to be able to wonder whether or not you'd like to pay attention to the activity or the place. All of those are resources as well. Let me give you the slightest example here. A few years ago, I designed a course. You could say it was weight loss, but I said, I'll help you lose weight just as soon as you tell me something else you want to lose. You want to lose your spouse, lose your keys, lose your dog. Yeah, okay, so I want to lose my spouse. Okay, great, we can do this one. Most people get very upset when they lose things. Right, so why would you lose weight? On the other hand, people love to gain stuff. So we talk about gaining health. And they go, but I don't want to gain health, I want to lose weight. Okay, people have magic words. And I'd say, well, you could gain slenderness. I like that, you could gain slenderness. They didn't like it as much. So we're playing around with this in different ways. And while I was listening, I was checking out which were the most developed meta programs. And I was often finding the following, is that the person would start talking to me, and they had a whole lot of information about how to lose weight, how to eat right, how to exercise. A lot of info. And they often, really, they liked people. Loved hanging out with people. People are great, and they are. And very often, they were homebodies, sense of place, nicely decorated places, good, wonderful place for everybody to come home to. And they sometimes had an interest in things. And when I noticed the portion of neuro-linguistic evidence, that is words and verbal and nonverbal gestures and so forth, they gave me, I noticed that the amount left in whatever period of time this was, say a day, a week, a month, dedicated to activity, there wasn't enough there to burn 1,000 calories. I mean, there just wasn't enough time. They didn't spend enough time being active to affect what they knew. And of course, they came to me and they wanted more information. Because we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know, you know? And so I believe people have all the resources they need. I do. And I also realize those resources are not only those states and those strategies and those beliefs, but they're also a place to put them, and her place wasn't big enough. So I used one that's not listed up here because it's outside the set. It's invisible. You can't see it, can you? I can gesture. You'll remember it. What is it? Time. I suggested we all have a sense of time. And so, and this is just one way to do it. I want you to understand, it's just an example. So I suggested that he or she put aside an hour, and maybe it was each day, maybe every other day. They had to agree to this. And I had ways to assist in agreeing to that, and we can go into some of those later. That's where we utilize meta programs to utilize meta programs. Like, Ron, I can't tell you to set aside an hour. Only you can do that. He goes, damn straight. And other stuff like that. So I say, set aside an hour. And I said, and you may not do anything else except move or not move. Those are the conditions. So if you just want to sit there and stare at the wall, you can. You may not watch television. You may not answer the phone. You may not, you cannot engage in any of these pastiming, if you will. You just go move if you want. You go for a walk, whatever you want. But the whole hour. And of course, what I found is normally people get bored and they'd go walk for the hour. Well, that moved it, doubled it, And then they were beginning to engage in activity. And then they come to me and go, walking is boring. It's too slow. And I go, bicycling? Just holding the hour. And just in the hour, because I wanted them to begin to make more distinctions of what they could do in that hour that had nothing to do with the other ones. Because they didn't know enough about this experience. And so not only in this program are we going to identify meta programs, expand your ability to use them, we're also going to teach how to change them. Something that is not supposed to be possible. Bullshit! You will be taught to do that carefully. This is a careful way of doing it because we're just expanding what they already do. Because what was it like when those people discovered the future? We are still fighting that cultural battle. We know that today. See, I look out into the world and I see the presuppositions and the meta programs, and I see these almost like these battles going on that the groups don't even realize. The one is just trying to defend the past. This worked. And another group is going, yeah, but it's not the way it was. There's more of us. And if you get enough of us, it changes things. And so we need to do something different. Something we haven't done before. And they're going, but what if it doesn't work? We know this works. And they go, that's the problem, it works. And they're going, what's your problem with me? I'm doing what works and you want me to stop? And so there's these content, these pitched arguments, journals and conferences and accusations, the content that comes out of these categories of experience, these different ways of knowing the world. I want you really to get this morning the impact of meta programs. That's why I offer that example. I'm not taking sides here. I think we do need to pay attention to tradition. We also need to see what's happening in the present and also do the future. But you can't do that unless you can do all three. And somebody else can't do it unless they can do all three. And so in that sense, we're talking about developing ourselves on the most basic of levels and not knowing necessarily what's going to come out of it. Who knew when Bellany looked backwards and made up all these crazy things that didn't happen, that all these crazy things would? Atomic power, incredible. Quantum mechanics being used to design how your cell phone works. You imagine that they couldn't even imagine walking around a little device you can talk to anybody on the planet who has one. And you know what? They're shaped the way they are because of Star Trek. Remember that? And cars are shaped the way they are because of Buck Rogers. We are affected by the images of the past we project into the future and project back to the past. I hope that I'm beginning to get you excited about this. That, as they say up here, people respond to their map of reality, not reality itself. You're master practitioner candidates, are you not? Okay, some of you teach NLP? Okay. And what do you teach in NLP about the map and the territory? So I'm hoping that you teach that the map is not the territory, right? Okay. I'm swearing you all to secrecy. Come on. Yes? You can share this among master practitioners and above, but not below. No, because there are stages of learning in life. Okay. So you teach somebody NLP at the beginning, you teach them the map is not the territory. As a master practitioner candidate, teacher, trainer here, I must inform you that the map is the territory. In fact, the map is all you ever get. Think about this. Every map through the entire history of the world, from the Egyptian maps of their religion to the furrows of their fields, to the religions of the Middle Ages and all the different sects and all the different religions around the world and the different ways they did things and the maps that people had of each other. Millions upon billions of maps. And the maps that we have now of quantum mechanics and the maps we have of the Krebs cycle and organic chemistry and maps of nonlinear systems dynamics. And that, of course, means what? There's going to be more maps in the future that we don't even know about. All of the same territory. This means what? The territory is infinite. Because every map that ever was Every map that is, every map that ever will be, has a certain correspondence to that territory. We just got our maps for this little slice of time in order that maybe we can get to the next generation, that we can, as John Grinder would say, previous language told us, here's what you need to pay attention to survive. And John would say, I don't think survival is good enough, not when we can thrive. Let's take a break.